former Adidas grassroots guy that had to deal with all these college football coaches on a daily basis. He's had schools like A&M, Kansas, Mississippi State, you name it, Adidas schools. And we've had a lot of firings in the last 24 hours. Even this morning, another Adidas school, Mississippi State, got fired. So Shannon Fabrashi's going to come in. Shannon, what up, man?
What's up, fellas? No, just hanging out. Just chilling in Scottsdale.
Oh, are you? I just left.
Oh, man, you got to let me know next time you're here.
Wait, are you living there now?
Yeah, we're here for a while. We've got, I'm involved with Mission Barbecue. We've got 131 restaurants. We're going to open up one here in Scottsdale. In fact, we're going to open up in Paradise Valley and then Surprise. And then we're coming out your way. We're going to do Vegas, and then we're going to look at California, but it's a little bit tough in California right now.
Man, I was just there for a week.
Yeah, you got to let me know. I did a
show last week from there. My buddy Pat Perez, the pro golfer, so he lives up there. I was actually just looking at property all last week.
Man, you got my man Darnell there, Warren Central Warriors, man, right up.
Come on now, what's going on, Shannon? Man, Dub C, Far East Side, how you doing?
Yeah. Doing well, brother. Doing well. Great to see you, man. Hey, congratulations on all your success. This is great that you've teamed up with Coach Brown.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you, man. It's been a long time. I told JB, I said, I wonder if Shannon's going to remember me when he hops on. It's been a long time, man. So it's good to see you're doing good.
A fellow defensive lineman, heck yeah. We stick together.
All we need is Whitlock on here, and we'll be fine.
Let me tell you something about Whitlock. Whitlock was an incredible high school player. He was about as good a high school offensive lineman. His college career was good. He would probably tell you he probably wishes it was a little bit better. But as far as high school offensive lineman, never played against one better than Jason.
Really?
Yeah. JB, he was so strong. He was so strong. I mean, he woke up in the morning as probably a 10th grader as a 400-pound bencher. He just had incredible strength and could run. He was in our 8th grade class. He was the third leg of the 400-meter team. 250 pounds as an 8th grader running the third leg. Unbelievable.
Damn. Hey, so I appreciate you coming on. I know you dealt with this. By the way, anyone that doesn't know, Shannon was responsible for helping us at Indy and Last Chance U, getting all of this beautiful Adidas gear that we've had that you saw on the show, on our banners, on the field, everywhere you saw. This is the man responsible. Plus, he helped Warren Central, Smitty's old school, what he was talking about earlier, to get an Adidas deal. So since you've left there, you're still tied in with all these guys. And yep. I know you were there. Jimbo took the A&M job. Beatty at KU, good friend of ours. That was an Adidas school. Mississippi State was an Adidas school, plus all the other Adidas schools in the country. And I know you got some insight on these firings. Jimbo let go yesterday. I was told about a week ago in Scottsdale from a good friend of mine that it was a done deal. They were just waiting to figure out the buyout. And Jimbo went in and said, I want you to fire me, but you're going to pay me. He didn't want to deal with it anymore about the rumors and all that. He wanted out. Anything you could add to that and tell us what's going on in A&M and any insight on, are they really trying to go after Deion Sanders, or is it Urban Meyer, or who is it?
So from my understanding of what's happening at A&M right now is pretty interesting because, we used to go on what they call these coaches trips at Adidas, and we would take all these coaches and we would get them in where we'd go to the Caribbean, we'd go to Hawaii, we'd go to the Bahamas. And what was interesting is you'd have these guys away from everybody, just their wives or their girlfriends. And we could really bond with them over a 2 or 3 day period. I used to say you could take a relationship that would take a year, because if you think about relationships, right, and my old saying is, your relationship with somebody is a direct result of how much time you're willing to spend. Now, you got to spend quality time with him. We got Mora. Mora hated Adidas when he was at UCLA. We got him on one of those trips, and we could work with him for 2 or 3 days, and then he was great to deal with. But Jimbo was always interesting because when we were going on those trips, we knew NIL was coming. We didn't know when it would come, and Jimbo used to, pretty much be like, hey, man, NIL will be great for A&M. I've got all these millionaires and I've got all these kids. It'll be great. Well, I don't think it worked out as well as he thought it would, because, you start, and I think you guys were talking about it earlier, you start talking about some of these kids and this is what's so interesting about NIL, they'll make the most money they ever make in their lives, probably, a lot of these kids, by the time they're 22. And it's flipped, right? Usually when you get to be in the 50s, like my age, you start to make more money then than you did, but I'm mature and I know how to handle it. And these kids are it's inverted. And they're making more money now. But what's interesting about Jimbo, getting back to that, and I think this is really fascinating. I think when you listen to Ross talk, the AD there, he made it clear that, what do they owe him? $75, $76 million? Something like that.
I think they paid him, yeah.
$77 million. So here's their logic. And I like to put my head in my mind in the head of the AD. They don't believe Jimbo's the leader. They don't like the people that he surrounded himself with. They want Jimbo gone, and they don't think Jimbo's the answer. So here's what you have as an AD. You say to yourself, okay, do I just wait another year and then it's going to cost me $68 million? Because you're really only saving $9 million by firing him now, because you still got to pay him the 68, and you lose a year of getting your program back on track. So they look at it as, we're not losing 77, we're going to lose $9 million because we're going to have to pay it out next year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. When they got that money, Shannon, I don't know if you can explain it. When they got money like the Saudis and Live Golf, like Pat talks about all the time, you can't even fly over the money they have, right?
No.
Like if you got that much money, is $9 million really? They don't care. They're going to get a collective anyway to pay that bill and get that guy out of there. So speaking of who could possibly take over, and before we get into Urban, who I know is going to be on everybody's wish list, let me ask you this. Lane Kiffin, I think, has a $9 million buyout only. So he's on the end. So, but we've heard the Lane Kiffin. I love Lane. Me and him are good friends. But he hasn't got over the proverbial hump and won anything meaningful. He's turned around programs from bottom feeders to relevant, but I don't think he's got them over the hump. James Franklin, similar situation at Penn State. I think that is probably – it's not lateral. I think A&M's a step up. But, again, what the Big Ten's becoming with SC, UCLA, and all these other things, I don't know if it's such a bad idea to leave Penn State. I would stay. Because he just can't beat Ohio State or Michigan yet. And he continues to bitch about the NIL, that they're not getting the money at Penn State. So he's mentioned those things, Shannon, which is ironic that he's in the mix of possibly the A&M, argument here as far as a coach to take over. And I don't know, you got a guy in Colorado now and who's hot, and I think his buyout's only $13 million. So the buyouts is what I'm trying to bring up to you. Are they going to go after a guy that just has a cheap buyout, or are they going to go after somebody sitting out on TV like an Urban and try to throw the biggest bag possible at him?
Well, I think the number one guy they want's Dan Campbell from the Lions. I mean, he's a Texas A&M guy. He's the first call they'll make. He'll probably tell them no. Not because they can't pay him enough money. Is that, who wants to go to college football from the NFL right now when you got a team rolling like the Lions? But he's a Texas A&M guy. He's from Texas. The one thing I've always said in business, that it's hard to fight against somebody going home. I mean, Darnell, if you got the chance to take the Warren Central job, or you got to do something at Warren Central, a place that you love, our high school, it's hard to compete with home. So that's the only reason why I even think Dan Campbell's a conversation in this, because he is going back to A&M. He'll be a hero there. They'll pay him over $100 million guaranteed, like they did Jimbo. I think he's making $4 million at the Lions right now. So the math makes sense. I just don't think leaving the Lions in the NFL right now makes sense.
Nah. Yeah. I hear you. That's a good take, though. I didn't even think about MCDC because like you said, I don't know if he would leave right now, the Lions, and what they got going is culture. I think
they're rolling right now.
Hard to find, Shannon.
And it's so hard. Like when you in business, when you try to, recruit a guy and you're trying to get him to move your seat. Like when I was at Under Armour, we always had a struggle getting people to move to Baltimore, particularly people from the West Coast, because you had Nike and Adidas up in Oregon. People were used to the West Coast. I mean, you're a West Coast guy, JB. What would I have to do to get you to live in Baltimore, Maryland?
Yeah.
And what you do is you do it with stock and you do it with cash. And that's really the only way you can even do it in this part.
So with your ears on the ground and still having, the insight from being in this thing so long, Mississippi State, 1 year after Mike Leach's unfortunate deal, rest in peace, he goes and they hire a young kid I thought was way too fast. I even have it on record. I did a video about it. I'm like, I'd hire somebody that's really long in the game. I understand the emotional hire, but emotional hires will get you fired. And now that is exactly my point, Shannon. A year ago when I said this emotional hire is going to make this kid not coach again because now he'll be blackballed. He was a head coach and he was bad. And now they're going to put it on him and no one else is going to hire him right away. Who's going to hire the guy? Nobody. So I said, I'm like, man, I wish he wouldn't take this job. After Mike Leach's situation, they should have went out and hired out from outside because you can't hire an emotional guy right away after a situation like that. I've never seen it work. Unfortunately, I wish I wasn't right on this one, but I was. Who does Mississippi State go after now? I know Adidas school as well, right?
Yeah, it is. And that's a tough one because he's got to take the job, though, JB, when they offer it to him.
I know. I get it.
That's the hard part about it. He has to take that job and he has to give it a go. What I can't stand is when schools allow a coach to get on the job training at the school's expense. It's just different when you're having to make those decisions. It's one thing to be able to make the decision in your mind when you don't actually have to make the call, right? When you don't have to decide if you're going to go for it on 4th and 1. And you just, as long as you come up, I always use Jerry Kill as a great example, old coach of Southern Illinois and Northern Illinois. He started out at Emporia State. He went to Pittsburgh State. He went to Southern Illinois. He went to Northern Illinois. He went to Minnesota. By the time he was at Minnesota and in Northern Illinois, he had coached ball, right? And those decision-making processes are the same no matter what level it is. And I just think it's a tough one. I think Mississippi State's a really hard call. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more, but I'll tell you this, they're not going to go with somebody who hasn't been a head coach before because they've been there, they've tried that. And ultimately, I think A&M is going to go through this list. I don't think Deion's the answer there. Deion can't take the job because Shedeur and Travis Hunter can't transfer again. So he can't leave. I mean, he's not leaving. He's got so much invested in his kid and making his kid a top draft pick. He ain't leaving him now. Now, if they could transfer, that'd be a different story, but they've already transferred once, so they can't go again. So I think Deion's out. I think ultimately there's a fascination at A&M with Mike Elko at Duke. I think they like him a lot. He's been there. He's coached there. And then I also think the dark horse in this is Traylor at Texas San Antonio. He's done a hell of a job there. But, I don't think those are the sexiest hires, I think, but they've already been there, done that with Jimbo. I'm hearing,
and I know Traylor well. He's one of the reasons I got Raheem Boyd to Indy, but he was Raheem's running back coach at Arkansas. I'm hearing that's as good as done deal. Traylor back to Arkansas as a head coach.
Yeah, I mean Pittman's out, so I think that's probably a great choice for them there. But but which job would he want?
I don't think his name's big enough for A&M. It's crazy. It sounds crazy. Arkansas is still in the fucking conference, but it carries more weight. You know that.
It depends on who says no, right? And Traylor's not at the top of the list, but he's probably at the middle of the list. And by the way, he's got to go somewhere now.
Right.
The time is right.
He's going to be what Campbell's at Iowa State. A guy that was hot, and now he can't get a job. So Traylor has to go now or forever hold your peace because he's going to be left out. I'm hearing Mississippi State's going to go after Gus Malzahn heavy. Heard that last night. Makes sense to me. Makes sense. It'll come back to more of a Leach type of tempo, even though they're going to be more run-oriented. It makes sense as far as having an offensive guy that's going to, make it a show again. Back in the SEC. I don't know what you think about that one.
Why wouldn't Arkansas go after Gus? Why wouldn't that be a better fit?
I don't know why they didn't go after – but tell me this. He's an Arkansas legend, high school legend, but why didn't they go after him the last 2 times?
Because I think sometimes ADs, and I think this happened to the Arkansas AD, you make the hire that's an easier person to manage. Sam Pittman was an offensive line coach. He wanted to be the coach. He wasn't going to give you a lot of trouble. He wasn't going to give you a lot of hassle. I'll tell you this. I worked with Jim Leavitt. You probably know Leavitt pretty well.
I know Jim really well.
So when I was at Under Armour, I signed him at South Florida. They had gone up to number 2 in the country. The AD there was a guy named Doug Woolard. Doug Woolard was a Southern Illinois guy. I went to Southern Illinois, so I knew both of them separately. This is when I knew Levitt was eventually going to get fired. They were second in the country. I was sitting in his office, and it was an unbelievable rise because he really did start that program from a trailer.
So people don't realize that was FCS he took him from.
Yes. Yes. And I was sitting there with Jim in his office. He was riding high. Doug popped his head in and he says, "Coach, can I meet with you around 2 today?" And without looking up, he goes, "No." And this is his boss, mind you. And he goes, "Well, when can I meet with you?" And I think his assistant was named Sherry. And he says, "Ask Sherry. She'll put something on the calendar." And I thought to myself, as that happened, they're going to fire the fucking guy as soon as they can because they don't like him. And he wouldn't allow himself to be managed. So he ended up not playing. The team started to go down the next couple of years. He had the incident in the locker room, and Woolard fired his ass the first time he could because he wouldn't allow himself to be managed. And if he did that in front of me, how many other times did he do that to Woolard where Woolard's like, "All right, man, this will come around. I'll get you at some point." And that's where some of these ADs just want guys that are easy to manage. And I think Pittman was just glad to be there. Now they got to bring in somebody who's going to push and shove and ask for more.
Yeah. Boise State, smaller school, but it had a great tradition. Fired what's his name today or last night? Yeah. Are they over their head as far as their time? Are they going to continue to try to go think that they're a big boy school? Or are they content finally and understanding that in Boise, Idaho, they're probably not going to be able to compete NIL-wise, and you're in Boise? It's not the same as when Peterson was there, when you got these guys, even when Harsin was there. Who does Boise go after?
I think Boise's a tough one because, I think it's going to continue to be really difficult for schools like Boise to compete because here's what we know is going to happen. As soon as they get some good players, that they develop some guys, people are going to come in and snake them. They're going to take them away. You look at Indiana, who I follow a little bit because I know some of the coaches at IU who, we'll see what happens with those guys, but their 2 best players last year. Michigan takes Tuttle and Michigan takes Barner, the tight end. They're 2 best players. And they didn't even promise them starting gigs. I mean, Tuttle's the backup. Barner's the tight end who got more. But, I think some of these kids are going to say, I got to take the money now. And ask yourself, would you rather be a starter on a 2-3 win Indiana team, or would you rather maybe play for a national championship, but you're a backup getting 20 snaps a game and making money? It's easy choice for me.
Now, I know Smitty has some questions. I'm trying to run this down. The West Coast, as you know, the Pac-12 is gone. It's going to be over with. Unfortunate, a great year they've had, and it's going to dissipate and disappear here. Let me ask you this: the coaches that you know well in this conference that were, especially that you had to deal with, who are these big boys going to poach out of this conference, or are they going to stay and be content going to the Big Ten? Because Oregon State and Jonathan Smith, a good friend of mine, I believe he's going to get poached hard here by somebody.
And he should.
And you also got Washington, who's a possible playoff team here. Some big boys might come after him. Yeah. Michigan State, A&M. I don't know if he's a dark horse at A&M or not. He got some Texas ties. And then you still have some other schools in this conference. Whittingham's never going anywhere. So anyone in the West Coast going to get poached by an A&M, Mississippi State, or something, or Michigan State, or anybody like that? Or
I think DeBoer certainly is in that running. He was at Indiana. He was the offensive coordinator for a while. He did a great job at Fresno. I think he's absolutely in the running. You're going to have to pay him, which they will. And then I think Jonathan Smith is just incredible. I mean, I'm not saying what he did at Oregon State's Bill Snyder-like, but my goodness, it's not that far off. It's as close as anybody, what he's done there. I mean, that's good football. It's, a lot of it's under center. A lot of it's just power football. And I think that's where a lot of if you want to do something different in the SEC, you get a guy like Jonathan Smith and you've got an incredible program. So I think both of those guys, JB, are in the running.
Now is good friend of mine as well, Dan Lanning. He's got the SEC ties. Is he going to be poached? And if he is poached, would you leave Oregon though?
I don't think he's poachable. if that's a word. I don't think he's poachable. I don't think Dan Lanning can go anywhere. Darnell, do you think he is?
I mean, to answer JB's initial question, even if he is, poached, I don't think he should leave Oregon. You know what I'm saying? I think the way the program's running under him, Oregon is a powerhouse, you know what I'm saying, as well. So you got all the resources in the world. I mean, what can these other schools offer? I mean, I guess more money, but I mean, he's not missing for money right now. So even if he is poachable, I don't think it would make sense for him to leave. The grass is not always greener on the other side.
Yeah, and listen, that Nike thing at Oregon is real. I mean, I lived that for a bunch of years. I mean, what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll give the players, exclusive shoes. This was before you could actually pay them cash. They would come in, they'd make 300 pairs of shoes, and they would be real tight with it. Guys like me and you two, we couldn't get them, even if we knew the equipment guy really well. And that was their way. And then the guys would go out and they'd sell the shoes, and they would sell them for a couple $grand, and they could make money that way. You're going to be able to get kids to Oregon because of Nike and because of the money that they have there. So I think he could be the king of the world at Oregon. I think he gets that. I think he's a really smart guy. But I will say this. I think whoever A&M gets, whoever Michigan State gets, they better get a younger guy that understands NIL. These guys like Dabo and Jimbo, and I know this for a fact with Jimbo, they freaking hated having to deal with paying this kid that and paying this kid that. They didn't embrace it. They thought about the good old days. It's like your grandpa talking about the good old days. The good old days are gone, man. If you're not because JB, and guys, answer me this question. I ask people this all the time. If you were the coach, JB, of a big-time college, and they said, JB, I'll give you the choice of one of two things. I'll give you a shit ton of big checkbook for yourself that you can pay kids, or I'll give you fabulous facilities and not a great checkbook. Which one do you want?
Back in the day, we would have took the facility. Now
Sure.
You can't get the players. It doesn't matter. They don't care.
They don't care. I mean, they could change in a phone booth for between practices if the money was right. If they rolled up to that thing in a new Benz, they're fine with that. And it's just the way it is.
Shannon, the crazy part is I'm hearing from coaches, buddies of mine, like at Louisville, for instance, who Brom's doing an incredible job. They may play at Florida State in a title game, and then you got 2 one-loss teams if they happen to beat Florida State. How crazy that's going to be in this playoff thing. But for they're telling me, like, JB, we have big-time kids that we're recruiting for 25 class who tell us we won't go unless it's Oregon, Alabama, or Georgia. We won't even consider you. Like, really? This is being told 2 years prior. This is the world we're living in. This thing is getting out of control. So, what do you say to that?
Well, I'd say it's really fascinating the way it's changing. I was involved in the U.S. Army All-American game for 10 years. I ran that thing for Adidas, and then when I was at Under Armour, I helped start the Under Armour game. And you know what's going to change about those All-Star games, JB, is that a lot of kids don't want to play in them now, but when they go to 12 teams, what the kids do now is the elite kids will go early, and they'll go practice in June, in December, and early January with those teams. Those games have got a big problem because they're going to start losing the top kids because you've already lost on those shows the commitments, right? The commitments are already done and sealed, so you really don't get the big commitments anymore. So it's one of those things. It's what I call the Blockbuster effect. Everybody knew Blockbuster was dying in the video business except Blockbuster, and they've crashed and they're in bankruptcy. So you got to be careful not to be the Blockbuster effect and be blindsided in the next show.
Do they have to pay these kids? Because that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I think eventually you're going to have to pay them, or you don't want to risk it because now you were just risking a year. And maybe if, like I remember Eno Benjamin, great player at Arizona State, hurt his ankle and it kind of screwed him out of his first year, but he wasn't getting paid back then like he is now. I think now there's the risk of, hey man, the better I play early, the more I'm probably going to make on NIL. So I think that risk is big as well.
Yeah. It's going to be crazy. I don't know before you get out of here, if you had to predict it, what's your 4-team playoff scenario? That's going to be probably, in my opinion, the craziest of all time so far. And do you see an undefeated? Because I've been told by some D1 head coaches, they think the first undefeated team may not be in, may get left out.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible, right? But I mean, I think you have to put Georgia in there, right? Now, if they lose that, listen, I think Alabama's rolling, right? I think we all do, I should say. And, I think if the quarterback can continue to be that threat and they can somehow get to and beat Georgia, then I think you've got two from the SEC, right? Do you agree with that? If they can beat Georgia, then both of them get in.
I don't know if both get in, because if Texas has one loss, you can't leave Texas, who beat Alabama, out.
It's also late in the year. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting scenario, right?
But Texas by day is losing face value by losing to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma lost to Oklahoma State, who just got throttled by UCF, a 5-5 team. They lost to KU, just lost to Texas Tech. So that Oklahoma loss looks horrific now on their resume. And then they struggle versus TCU the other night, and they almost come back and beat them. So
I think I still think you get the two SEC teams in. If Washington runs the table, Washington's going to stay in there. And then Florida State, if they're undefeated, I think they get in.
But what about Michigan?
Michigan, then Merry Christmas. Yeah, you're right.
Or if Ohio State beats Michigan, now Ohio State's in. It's like it's crazy.
Well, no, that's a good point. And I know you guys were talking about Michigan earlier in Harbaugh. That's the risk that they run. Remember, each school, and I believe the number, if you get to the national championship game, every school in your conference gets $4 or $5 million just from getting into that championship. So the Big Ten's got to be careful not to screw themselves and their partners out of money. I mean, that's significant money, particularly if you're looking, for NIL money to pay some of these kids. I mean, that's where it's going to come from.
Good point. Yeah.
Shannon, before you go, I got to bring this up. So last week or 2 weeks ago, JB said that the worst inner city high school football team in LA would dominate Warren Central. Now, listen, I know we've had our struggles as of late. We haven't been as dominant as previous times, but can you please tell JB, just historically speaking, how dominant Warren Central is? Because he's not really respecting us when I say it. So maybe if you say it, he'll believe it.
Shannon knows like I do. He recruits the nation. Oh, man, he's going to be real.
Maybe you're making a typical mistake that a lot of West Coast guys make in confusing the state of Indiana with the MIC, which is basically Indianapolis, just the city of Indianapolis, where we have the right kind of players there. And there's 2 or 3 high schools that could really play with anybody in the country there. I don't dispute that. And here's how you know that. When you look at Indiana high school football, the tournament is determined once the winner of Indianapolis comes out. Because once they bring in someone from the north or the south, it's irrelevant. I mean, I remember a few years ago, several years ago, at the halftime, they brought this team down, Hobart, and it was 56-3 at halftime, and I was surprised they got 3. So you remember, Indianapolis is what Darnell and I are talking about, not outside of Indianapolis. 100% true. But boy, inside Indianapolis, there's some cats that can go.
Oh yeah, I've had a ton. I recruited a ton. I get it. I mean, I love it. I love the players. I mean, you know me. I had the players. You helped me get a few. So
yeah.
Hey, Shannon helped me get some. I used to recruit the hell out of Gary and Fort Wayne because they got some dudes too that are in pockets. But Shannon, it's always a pleasure, man. We have to do this again. We have to have you on. I got to know you're in Scottsdale. I'll text you, and I'll be back there soon again. I'm always there with Pat, so I'll be back there. We have to hook up because all we do is smoke meat up at his house. So we got to hook up.
I will tell you this. I just finished competing in the Arizona Rib Cook-Off. About 45 guys. I got 8th. I was one of there's 6 judges. I was one of only 6 people. One judge gave me a perfect score on my ribs. So I just finished the competition here. So I'm ready to go. And all I use is a Weber kettle grill. That's all I need.
Damn.
JB, hold on. You got some competition now. You got some competition.
Hey, Shannon, much love, man. I appreciate you. Good seeing you, and we'll hook up soon.
Go Warriors. See you, Darnell.
Yes, sir.